We'll now continue our presentation with a discussion of the topic of sin. I don't believe any gospel presentation could possibly be complete without a discussion of this topic, sin. It can't be put in its proper context without reviewing this issue, and that means that we would have to go back to the beginning of the story of sin in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, where sin first entered the scene for mankind. Now, this is an overview video, so I will proceed as though you're already familiar with the basic story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapters 1 through 3, the creation story all the way through to the fall. And if you're not familiar, I do encourage you to go back and take a look at those scriptures just to get more familiar with the details. But again, for the purposes of our overview, I'll proceed as though you're basically familiar. All right. So first, I'll explain this figure that we see here. You see the sort of a cartoon figure of a man, and he's got a thick outline color around the edges of the figure, and then on the inside is another color. Here I've used sort of a grayish neutral color on the outside and a sort of grayish whitish color on the inside. And before I proceed, I'd like to say that these color codes are going to be used throughout this presentation, and they are not intended to in any way to represent actual skin colors of a person, obviously. They only represent different states of being in a man's physical and spiritual condition. And we use color codes to watch the changes that occur throughout the history of man and his relationship with God. So, yeah, just keep in mind that this is only meant to represent those spiritual and physical states, not actual human beings' skin color. So again, here's Adam, and on the outside, he's sort of a neutral color. On the inside, neutral. And what this represents is Adam's state before the fall, before he rebelled against God and declared his independence from God, where we'll just call him sort of a free agent. Adam was created in the image and likeness of God. He was created to be a vessel to carry God's glory, to carry God's life, and to be an expression of God's ways, a vessel for God to express himself through in the earth. So at this point, he's neither really yielded himself completely to God, nor has he really yielded himself to Satan and his wicked kingdom. Here he's still sort of a free agent. And you may be familiar with the Genesis account where God did plant two trees in the middle of the Garden of Eden. The garden is where he put Adam and told him to tend and keep the garden. And one of those trees was the tree of life. The other tree was a tree called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God commanded Adam not to eat from this tree. But you may know that Satan was at the tree and tempted Eve and then deceived her. And then that led to Adam rebelling and deciding to eat from this tree. So he did eat that fruit. And at the moment he did that, God's words hit their mark. Adam had fallen into a totally different condition. Now, just like God said, he would die. So here we represent Adam's physical and spiritual condition with a different color. Here I've used sort of a red color, sort of a thick red line on the outside, and this represents Adam's flesh. And the new state of Adam's flesh is now it is corruptible and it can die. Obviously, it can be tempted by sin. It can get sick, it can suffer, it can feel pain. And these are all attributes that are the result of this curse that came upon Adam, that God pronounced upon Adam and the earth when Adam rebelled against God. On the inside, we've also used a reddish color, and this represents Adam's spiritual condition. Instead of yielding himself to God and his life and his glory, he has yielded himself to Satan, to be a vessel through which Satan can express himself and work to establish his wicked kingdom in the earth and work against God's kingdom. This is the result of Adam's rebellion against God. Now let's look at some scriptures that deal with this. Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. And to Adam he said, this is God speaking, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So in this scripture, God is describing quite a few things. The old dust to dust scripture explains Adam's new nature that is subject to death. He's going to return to the ground. God describes how the ground is now cursed. Instead of living and abiding in the garden where all of his needs are bountifully and plentifully met, now he has to work hard for all of his needs and his provision. And this is also part of the curse that was handed down through Adam's generations. So let's talk about that topic. This is something that I believe a lot of people miss when they discuss the issue of sin. As you can see, we have different figures here falling out behind Adam, and this represents the generations of man that came after him. And each one of them has inherited the same nature that Adam fell into when he rebelled against God and declared his independence from God as his source of life. Now, each one of those people is subject to the truth explained in this scripture here, Romans 5:12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Because of Adam's rebellion, the inheritance that he left for every man to come after him, every person, is a sinful, fallen, rebellious nature, just like the one that fell upon him, that he took upon himself when he rebelled against God. Here's Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. I think this is an important scripture to take a look at. Think about all the people who examine their lives, kind of like the two leaves that we looked at earlier. And some can see the trouble and they recognize their sin very handily. But others are like that green shiny leaf and they just don't see any sin in their life because they're looking outwardly at all the things that appear to be going well, but they do not understand that sin first is an issue of a spiritual condition, a spiritual nature, one that is disconnected from God as its source of life. And it is a terrible deception for a person to go on believing that because things look good on the outside, that they are therefore also going well on the inside in their spiritual condition. So this scripture explains that. And one illustration that I like to use to help help make the point is that of a child, a baby that's born addicted to drugs. Now, many of us have seen this, maybe in person, or maybe you just know about it from television or something like that. And oh, what a terrible picture to see a child struggling with an addiction that they did not bring upon themselves. That addiction is the result of a choice, decisions that the generations before that child made. However, that child has to walk in the consequences of that decision and that sin that had passed through the parents down to him or her. And he didn't ask for that condition, but he surely received it. And without some type of intervention, that decision that his mother and father made can definitely destroy his life as well. That's not a perfect analogy for the spiritual truth of the sin that is passed down from Adam, but it is pretty close. And I think it helps illustrate the point of why all are counted guilty of sin. No man can claim innocence. Romans 6:23. For the wages of sin is death. I'm going to show the rest of the scripture in our next slide when we talk about our remedy. But for now, it is important to know that the only outcome after a life spent in a sinful nature, abiding in the same nature as Adam, is death. That is the consequence of this nature, and there's nothing man can do to escape it for himself. And this is something that every person must come to terms with, this truth. For the wages of sin is death. both physical and spiritual death. Revelation 21:8. But the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but unfortunately, it is a truth and a reality that too many people are going to have to come face to face with. And every man who continues to abide in this nature inherited from Adam has to suffer this fate. And without God himself stepping in, man has no hope. He is wretched. He has no alternative. He cannot change his course for himself. There is nothing he can do to rescue himself from what Revelation 21:8 describes. Nothing he can do. Only God himself can rescue mankind from this fallen, sinful, wicked condition, no matter what the man on the outside looks like, green leaf or shriveled leaf. The spiritual condition determines whether this will be that person's final fate. In our next slide, we're going to look at the fact that God did not leave man to this fate, to this condition, but he has provided a remedy.